Hello there. There are signs of a change to the pattern coming up. Not just yet, and we'll get there eventually. I just wanted to start off this week's farming forecast by looking back at a lesser talked about variable for February, the wind. We know it was the wettest February on record in the UK. We know it was one of the mildest on record as well, especially in East Anglia. But actually, one of the more interesting nuggets of information that came out last week, the wind aspects. Now, if we take February as a whole and average the wind for every hour at 10 metres above sea level for the whole month, it was an incredibly windy month indeed. Not just for individual events, we're talking about the whole month away from the main storms that came through. And actually, as this map suggests here, using reanalysis data, for much of at least England and Wales, but actually extending across the Republic of Ireland and also across parts of the nearby continent, it was the windiest month, not just any February, but any month for the last 30 years. You have to go back to 1990 to find a month that was actually windier than February 2020. So quite a remarkable month, especially, as I say, across this central swathe into northwest parts of Europe. It wasn't necessarily that windy compared to normal across northwest Scotland. January here was actually windier than February 2020, hence why it still says 2020 on this map. And actually, these little red boxes here that you see extending particularly across western parts of Germany, the data used in this map goes back to 1979. These red boxes basically mean it's the windiest month on record in this data set, so at least the windiest month for over 4 decades across some parts of neighbouring Europe. Just really highlighting how unusually windy last month was, which of course has big implications on whether you're trying to get out and do some spraying, for example. It's been a real tricky month for that, amongst many other activities, of course, across up and down really the UK as well. Now, one of the other interesting aspects, of course, is the water side of things. Now, cast your mind back 2 summers ago, back to summer 2018, an incredibly hot, incredibly dry summer. We went 50 days or more without a single drop of rain in parts of East Anglia. At the time, a lot of people were making comparisons with 1976 and some concerns then about whether there would be some issues with water supplies. But summer 2018 actually came after a fairly wet winter. So this graph here, just a randomly picked river gauge near Thetford, shows the flow through the river Little Ouse here. And you can see when the flow goes up and down during the course of the winter and the summer, to do with the rainfall that we've had as well. So relatively wet winter during 2017-2018 winter meant that, yes, okay, the flows went down because of the dry weather in the summer, but actually not as low as they did last summer. And of course, last summer the problem was we had a very dry summer in 2018, a relatively dry winter that followed, and then we went back into another relatively hot and dry summer once again. And so the river flows were actually record-breakingly low in parts of East Anglia, at least, as you can see on this graphic here. And there were some serious concerns about irrigation prospects almost a year ago. The Environment Agency Irrigation Prospects Report will be out in late April, early May. Last year, they were talking about restrictions on being able to abstract water from groundwater or indeed surface water such as rivers. This year, things are looking much, much healthier, and that's because obviously we've had such a wet winter. You can see how quickly this graph has jumped from exceptionally low to exceptionally high, in fact almost record-breaking in some of these rivers for the amount of flow right now. So it's been a very wet winter. That has helped the groundwater and the river supplies, and so that means irrigation this spring and summer should be much, much better in terms of not having as many restrictions imposed. The only area right now that the Environment Agency are flagging up that may have some restrictions is the Fenland area and the rivers that flow through that catchment area, because obviously the river levels here aren't quite as high as they are elsewhere in the UK, and also any dry weather, any extended dry spell may have a bit of an impact on the river flows there later on in the summer. So something to keep an eye on, but right now things are actually looking fairly healthy for the time of the year, at least going forward through the spring and the summer. Will it stay that way? Well, the jet stream right now is fairly active. This is it today, a very strong jet stream, quite flat and zonal across the Atlantic. So when it's this sort of west to east direction, we call that a zonal jet stream. A lot of red here indicating it's fairly active right now. But actually over the next few days, you'll notice it weakens quite a bit. We lose these red colours and it starts to meander about a bit more, break up a bit more as well. And actually by the weekend, notice it becomes much more what we call amplified, where we get these big waves, ridges and troughs developing in the jet stream. That means things become a bit slower moving. It also means the forecast becomes quite tricky to pin down because the weather will depend on which part of this jet stream configuration you're sitting in. So where we get these troughs here, that's where low pressure is often residing. It's often cool, it's often showery, that sort of thing. Where you get the ridges, that's where higher pressure tends to be. And when you get a pattern that's like this, it tends to move much more slowly. So you can end up with low pressure for several days, but equally high pressure for several days. And getting the timing and position of these features will be crucial in determining when and where those different weather features will go over the next week or so. So there will be some chopping and changing to be had in the medium range. In the short range, relatively high confidence in the evolution of the forecast. So this is Wednesday, a lot of isobars indicating quite a blustery day right across the board. There'll be some early rain to clear from the southeast from an old weather front, and then low pressure off towards the northwest, so plenty of showers piling into the north and west, and actually a more organised band of rain will sweep eastwards across the whole of the UK through the latter stages of Wednesday into Wednesday evening. With that, we could actually have some quite squally conditions across England and Wales. On the northern edge of that, because we've got quite cold air coming out of Canada across the northern half of the UK, there could well be quite a bit of snow, even to some relatively low levels across Scotland, maybe parts of northern England, Northern Ireland, through late Wednesday into Wednesday evening and Wednesday night. So that's something to keep an eye on, but we'll all get some fairly blustery conditions coming through later on in the day. And even skipping forward into Thursday, not a great deal of change to the overall pattern. Low pressure still more or less dominating to the north, still a brisk westerly flow driving showers in for Thursday. Again, wintry across northern areas in particular. By Friday, a very brief, and I mean brief, breather with this very small ridge developing here. So we're starting to say goodbye to the showery activity. As that low clears, we will get a shot of northerly air coming in. So it could actually be some quite chilly air over the UK on Friday daytime with this very weak ridge building in from the west. But it doesn't last very long. It's not a very pronounced feature because already the next area of low pressure with some showery rain arriving across the Republic of Ireland through the afternoon, that will continue to track east. And then behind that, a further series of lows coming in as we go into the weekend. So still maintaining an unsettled flavour, and actually this low deepening all the while into the weekend. So again, strengthening winds because of the isobars. By this stage, the winds are coming up from the southwest, so it's a mild direction. Temperatures again jumping back up on Saturday, but again we'll have a band of rain sinking southeast, particularly during Saturday evening and Saturday night, and then behind it back into a chillier west or northwesterly flow with showers once again. So until the end of the week, it's still pretty changeable. Most of the rain will be in the north and the west of the UK, but occasionally we'll see that extending further south and east as the more organised fronts and features come through in the flow. Now it is all changed though into next week gradually, and there's a lot of uncertainty about the beginning of next week. So this is for the early part of next week here, just a snapshot to give an idea of what may be happening. What we're likely to see is high pressure building in from the Azores up towards the UK. So pressure will be rising into the beginning of next week. But remember, on the back side of that low, we'll have imported some quite chilly air down from the north. So it will be quite a cold start to next week with more in the way of frost and some chillier days, that sort of thing. But remember, the jet stream is much more amplified for the beginning of next week. And that means little disturbances high up in the atmosphere could generate small scale areas of low pressure, such as this one here I've highlighted over northern France. The main upper low is down here across Spain, not really affecting us too much, but there may be some smaller scale features that do develop that the models aren't quite indicating yet or haven't quite got a good handle on right now. So while the overall message is for pressure to gradually build with time through next week up from the southwest, we've just got to bear in mind that there could be some small areas of showery rain that develop almost anywhere, perhaps more locally towards the east and the south of the UK. But just keep an eye on that because the forecast for those little features may change even within 2 days of them happening. So we may not have a good handle on these perhaps until nearer Saturday, Sunday, if not a bit later than that. Either way, we think by the second half of next week, so from about Thursday-ish onwards, more stronger signals here for higher pressure to build in across the UK for a few days. So that will settle things down fairly widely, has to be said, and with lighter winds it would bring an increased risk of frost. You can see the sort of blue sheen on the map here indicating more threat of some frost coming in by the time we get through the latter part of next week. Weather fronts over the Atlantic not a million miles away, and they may creep back in towards the northwest later on in the week. Now this is a snapshot for the second half of the week. It's possible by the weekend or perhaps the beginning of the following week, this high may have shifted again towards the northeast, and in doing so the breeze on the southern flank may pick up a bit. So not windy necessarily, but breezier perhaps by the end of the weekend into the following week. And with that, depending on the direction, it could import some chilly air in from the east. Nothing desperately cold, of course. Much of Europe's been well above average this winter. We don't really have that reservoir of very cold air to tap into. But it just depends on the overall position of this high by the weekend as to whether we get more of a northeasterly or more of a southeasterly, and that will obviously dictate the temperatures going forward in time as well. So to kind of highlight that in a little bit more detail, just to explain what's going on, this is our ensemble forecast for the mean sea level pressure at Oxford. If you want to know what ensemble forecasting is and how they are created, how we use them to make a forecast, just click on the link up here and you can see an explainer video that we've recorded earlier. But basically these lines here, all these grey lines, are different computer models that have all been run. They all have slightly different outcomes. You can see as you go further forward in time here towards the right of the graph, the spread gets bigger, the uncertainty grows. The red line here is the average of all of these lines. And what they basically show is lowish pressure generally dominating for the rest of this week. But as we go into next week, notice how the pressure starts to rise a bit, particularly the first part of next week. But some uncertainty about how high and what time that comes in, hence a bit of spread here. But there is a stronger signal from most of the models towards the end of next week, around Wednesday, Thursday, Friday time, for the pressure to build more strongly over the UK. So a better chance of high pressure developing later next week, but perhaps even a bit earlier, depending on how things play out. So that's how things are looking here. But with high pressure building in, of course, it means that we will get some fairly big temperature ranges. It could be fairly warm and any sunshine by day because the sun is still fairly strong, but it could also be quite chilly at night with a risk of frost. And you'll notice later on in the sequence, the pressure starts to come down a touch, and that's just the high pressure drifting a bit further away from us. But a lot of spread here. It could stay quite high. It could turn fairly low, but notice none of these members are going for anything excessively low. It's still above 1010 millibars. So we're not talking about any major deep lows or anything like that coming in. It still looks relatively settled across the southern parts of the UK in particular. So big diurnal ranges will be potentially a feature with this high, depending on where we can source our air from. And by that, we basically mean the difference in temperature between your morning minimum and your afternoon maximum. So you could start the day, for example, sub-zero with a frost on the ground because we'll have had clear skies during the night. Nights are still very long at this time of the year, of course. But with the strengthening sun and with clear skies during the day, temperatures potentially could get up to the mid, maybe even high teens in the afternoons. And that gives you quite a big diurnal range, perhaps as much as 20-degree difference between the morning and the afternoon values, for example. So that's just something that could happen if skies are clear. If it's cloudy, obviously it won't be as cold at night because the temperatures won't cool off as much, and if it's cloudy by day, of course, it won't be as warm by day, and so your diurnal range will be a lot smaller during the course if the cloudy conditions persist, basically. Now, if you want to know a bit more information about what's going on, there's a lot of uncertainties to say about what will happen early part of next week, and then things become a bit more confident later in the week, then my advice is to give our forecasters a call. We're available 6 till 6 every single day, and we're looking at all of this information and more coming in throughout each and every day, and we can give you the latest information that comes into us. As I say, the forecast will probably change quite a bit between now and the weekend for the beginning of next week, and so if you give our team of forecasters a call, we can answer those questions for you and hopefully give you the important advice that you need. So looking across Europe for next week, and you can see the red here, that's where pressure is higher than normal, building in across a good chunk of Europe here, so settling things down. Across the UK, you can see we're on the edge of it, if you like. Low pressure off towards the northwest, high pressure trying to ridge in across southern areas more frequently, but perhaps for a couple of days more widely across the UK later on in the week. And of course that has a bit of an impact on temperature, for example. Generally speaking, most of Europe here above average, but there will be some frosty nights, and locally any fog will tend to affect your temperatures and bring them below average. But generally speaking, near or above average across most of Europe. And of course, with high pressure nearby, rainfall, as you can see here, will be fairly well below average across many areas. Notice though, above average across parts of eastern Spain, in particular, closer to that cut-off low I talked about earlier. Then for the week after, still a strong signal here for that high pressure that may have built over the UK to then drift and build more strongly across parts of Scandinavia, Eastern Europe, Western Russia, for example. So here we could see a fairly big area of high pressure, fairly strong area of high pressure, settling things down here. Again, notice the UK still on the edge of it, but I still think it'll have some impact on our weather. The further northwest you are, though, the closer you are to that area of low pressure, so you may see a lot more in the way of rain across northwestern parts of the UK, whereas high pressure will tend to dominate further south and east. Temperature-wise, well above average across Scandinavia, notice. Elsewhere, the signal is not massively strong for above average. It's sort of near slightly above normal. And it has to be said, if we do get some frosty nights and any fog that lingers, that could have an impact on the temperatures by day as well. So not necessarily sunny and warm all the time. It could be quite cloudy and cool depending on exactly where that flow of air is coming from. If it's coming from the southeast, it'll be fairly warm. If it's coming from the northeast, it'll be fairly cool and cloudy. Just something to bear in mind. And then for the rainfall, we're looking at pretty much below average rainfall across much of Europe here. Again, still that signal for above average across eastern parts of Spain because of low pressure nearby. And then towards the end of March into early April, signs are, again, high pressure near the UK at least, and still extending across much of Europe as well. Low pressure still dominating across the Mediterranean. So temperature-wise, again, it's going to be fairly warm, or above average, I should say, across Scandinavia, Eastern Europe, Western Russia. There are signs, though, with that high pressure building to the western side of Europe, that temperatures here, especially with frosty nights, and again, more in the way of cloud and more of a cooler northeasterly flow potentially, that we could see temperatures coming below average towards the end of the month. So frost is the main story here rather than rain in general. And in terms of rainfall, it's sort of near or slightly below. It's a long way off. It could change some, but at the moment, the general forecast for here where the high pressure is for below average. And you can see where the low pressure is dominating across the Mediterranean. That's where we're seeing these green colours here indicating above average rainfall, showers and thunderstorms running through the Med, that sort of thing. So, you know, things are starting to change from next week onwards with higher pressure building in. Until then, though, it's still looking pretty changeable with some rain or showers. As I say, the beginning of next week will be quite chilly with a brief northerly flow, but high pressure will try to build in early next week, but a lot of detail in the local specifics for where you are in the UK. But a better chance of high pressure building more widely later next week. And as that drifts away, the south and east will likely stay more dry. Still the odd front can't be ruled out, but overall more in the way of dry weather here, but it will stay pretty wet at times the further north and west you are. And with high pressure, of course, we will see some fairly large diurnal ranges with an increased risk of frost and fog going forward as well. So still some detail to iron out over the next few days, and as ever, you can keep up to date with the latest day-by-day forecast by following us on social media.